From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the African Middle East Division. I'm Mary Jane Deeb, Chief of the Division, and I'm delighted to see you, so many of you here today for the presentation that will surely thrill you. It is by Toyin Falola, a man who in his writings and in his talks challenges our preconceptions, who lets us look at the world and at Africa in particular from new and exciting perspectives. Dr. Angel Baptiste will introduce him more fully in a moment, but I feel I must first say a few things about him. I actually met him here at the library several years ago when he first became a member of the board of the Scholars Council at the Kluge Center, which at the time was under Dr. Carolyn Brown, who's with us today. And so we had a couple of very interesting discussions. And then one day, a couple of years later, he called out of the blue and suggested that I present my candidacy to the African Studies Association board, as I had worked for many years on North Africa. I did, and was very honored when I was elected by the members of the ASA. I then attended two of the board's weekend meetings and watched how Professor Falola deftly and diplomatically guided its proceedings, highlighted important issues, advised on important matters, suggested speakers, brought up new ideas. Why am I saying this? My point is that he is not only an extraordinary scholar, as you will hear in a moment, but that his accomplishment range in many fields, in many ways. He's a dreamer, a scholar, a thinker, but he's also a practical man, a man who knows where things should be going. And so, not surprisingly, as you will be invited to see after the talk, Dr. Baptiste has arranged a wonderful display of Professor Falola's works and works about him in our conference room. So not surprisingly, I found a book which was dedicated to him. And the book speaks about the man, the mask, the muse. But if you look at the chapters, Toyin Falola, a poet within and without, chapter 3, chapter 4, Toyin Falola, volcanic force, diasporic muse. Toyin Falola, the African historian and scholar. Toyin Falola, the master teacher. Toyin Falola in his intellectual majesty. Toyin Falola, a neo-Renaissance man. And it goes on, chapter after chapter, the recognition of what he has contributed to the field. So, but I will leave that to Dr. Baptiste, who told me, don't take my ideas this morning. No, I said, no, there's so much to be said. But I want to say a few things about our division before we continue with the program. Our division is very honored to have Professor Falola speak to us today. But it's a division that is responsible for countries around the world, for 78 countries to be exact, and for its literature, politics, history, humanities, social sciences. We have collections that we hold and shelf in the vernacular, collections from the Middle East, Central Asia, the whole of Africa, North and Sub-Saharan, the Caucasus. We extend up to small groups in China, and we have three sections with scholars really who are working and who advise and help researchers to bring their materials to them. The three sections are the Hebraic section, the African section, and the Near East sections. And today, this program is organized by the African section. And we don't only, provide the materials for research. We also try to display our materials to attract people. We have exhibits. We have certainly exciting programs, as the one today. We show films. And recently, after a long administrative road that we all took, we're now on the social media. And we have blogs, and our staff writes blogs about the collections, about our materials. We actually have Facebook. Finally, we moved into the 21st century. And so, but they focus, again, on our collections as a way of reaching out. So you will have on your chair, you will find our ads for our blogs and Facebooks. So those, we announce our programs there. Please subscribe so that you can have the announcements come to you and you know what is going on here at the library. We have like us on Facebook. We're really nice. You should just like us, okay? And I have, again, yesterday, African Studies Association has decided to link up to us. And they, not only do they like us, they actually posted Marita Harper's blog on Timbuktu. They announced Professor Falola's talk. So that is going out to the African Studies community all over. And so we're very excited about that, and we'd like you to join us. I will stop now, but I want to remind you that we are videotaping this program, as we videotape most of our programs, which means that they will be accessible not only here, the talk, but around the world. And so if, when the question answer time comes, if you want to ask questions, please remember that you are being videotaped, and asking questions means that you've given us permission to record you and that your remarks may be posted on the web. Okay? So now let me introduce our own Dr. Angel Baptiste, area specialist for West Africa, and really a sought-after scholar and librarian in the African section of the division. And she will give you more depth to my presentation on Professor Falola. Okay, so Dr. Baptiste.
Good afternoon. I'd like to echo Dr. Deeb, the chief of our division, in welcoming you to the African and Middle Eastern Division. And I'd also like to extend a personal invitation, return to our African and Middle Eastern Division reading room to explore the vast wealth of Africana resources that are held by the library. Today is a special honor for me. Dr. Falola doesn't quite know it, but this has been an objective of mine for probably 5 or more years. So I thank you for being here today. It is a special honor for me to introduce Professor Toyin Falola, widely acclaimed by colleagues and students in the African Studies field as the Dean of Nigerian History, the Doyen of African Studies, and a neo-Renaissance man. Dr. Falola is the Jacob and Francis Sanger Mosiker Chair in the Humanities and University Distinguished Teaching Professor of African Studies at the University of Texas at Austin. He is a member of the Library of Congress Scholars Council, and currently he is in residence as the Kluge Chair in Countries and Cultures of the South at the library's John W. Kluge Center, researching a project titled African Immigrant Communities in the United States. A historian, a poet, critic, master teacher, and community leader, Dr. Falola earned his BA and PhD in history at the University of Ife in Nigeria. He is a fellow of the Historical Society of Nigeria and a fellow of the Nigerian Academy of Letters. His wide-ranging intellectual interests include Atlantic history, diaspora and migration, empire and globalization, intellectual history, international relations, religion, and culture. Dr. Falola has more than 150 books in print. Actually, I did a search of the library's card catalog, and we hold 156 books in print. As a champion of the African Studies field, Dr. Falola has supported research through his mentorship of students and his long-term editorship of the African Economic History Review. His service on many academic journal editorial boards, and his creation and editorship of several academic book series, including the University of Rochester series, Studies in African History and the Diaspora, the Carolina Academic Press African World Series, and Culture and Customs of Africa by Greenwood Press. Dr. Falola has received various awards and honors, including, I believe, 5 honorary doctorate degrees, 7 honorary doctorate degrees, the Jean Holloway Award for Teaching Excellence, the Texas Execs Teaching Award, the Cardone Distinguished Award for Research Excellence, the Sheikh Anta Diop Award for Exemplary Scholarship in African Studies, and the African Studies Association Distinguished Africanist Award. The Association of Third World Studies has endowed a book prize named after him, the Toyin Falola Annual Prize for the Best Book on Africa. The cumulative contributions of Dr. Falola as an eminent scholar and public intellectual have led to 5 volumes published in his honor and a biocritical work. The impact of his scholarship is presented in Abdul Bangura's Toyin Falola and African Epistemologies. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Toyin Falola. Thank you.
I think those introductions should serve as a lecture so that we can begin to ask questions. Thank you so much for your kindness, and I can only pray and wish that I'm able to repay that kindness. I have to follow certain conventions, some of which may be new to you, and which is that anytime I speak, I must first extend the greetings from the kings that I do represent each time I do a public performance. And I'm representing 3 kings here who say I must extend my greetings to you. And the Sultan of Sokoto also asked me to extend his greetings to you I have to deliver those messages. I'm very grateful to Mary, to Angel, to Caroline here. She wanted to come and do her research, and she and her husband decided to stay. When she was the director of CLUGI, she asked me for a proposal, which I wrote, on the basis of which I'm here. And on December 15, I'll be doing a conference on African immigrants in the US. This is a small publicity, and I hope you all will come. Let me provide a small context to this topic. And it's a broader context. Many of you may not be aware that this is a tremendous moment in Africa with the creation of so many private universities. Indeed, in a country like Nigeria, the number of private universities is now more than the number of public schools. And we have colleagues who have the universities of their own. It didn't occur to me. If it had occurred to me, I would have been thinking of establishing my own university. Because nobody saw this 30 years ago. We have a colleague in Seattle who moved to Ghana to establish his own university. And a good friend of mine, when I was teaching, asked us to establish his own university. What this has done is to let us begin to rethink the inheritances in various ways, and to use those private universities to test a set of new ideas, and to see things that don't work, which private universities can rethink with rapidity outside of hegemonic state power structure and outside of corruption. So, and as we are, and I'm on the board of some of these universities in which we have the opportunities to say, this is how we want to define humanities and things like that. And this is how we want to define some of what we inherited from the Western Academy and localize them far more creatively than our predecessors have done. And this is part of the challenge. And what I've been doing in recent years is to rethink many of these things. So this lecture will actually work more as a workshop than as a lecture, in which we spend 3 days and say, okay, this is what we agree with. How do we now translate what we're talking about into curriculum and begin to teach them? Because that project of translation moves us away just from making theoretical statements without grounding them in those things that are practical. And we're very grateful to the MacArthur that awarded his award for last year to one of these person who created his own university in Ghana. He used to work for Microsoft. And the ability to rethink many of this is so new in the continent. So the component of what I want to present is in 4 categories. What is Ritual Archive? How can I break it down into its components? I will do those. But the real challenging one, the ontologies, epistemologies, I will not be able to do, because that will fit more into a seminar of 3 hours where we can actually do a lot of debate. And I will also do how we can connect these ritual archives into the public domain. So the component I'll be talking about are aspects that will interest a library and librarians. And then I will leave out the component that will interest those who like to do heavy theories. So let me start by defining what I mean by ritual archives, which is how you accumulate words and text and ideas and symbols and shrines and images, performances, and objects that document as well as speak to religious experiences and practices in ways in which we're able to understand an African world through various bodies of philosophies, literatures, languages, histories, and more. And by implication, these ritual archives are huge. Unbounded in scale and scope, they store tremendous amount of data on both natural and supernatural agents, ancestors, gods, good, witches, life, death, festivals, the interactions between the spiritual spaces, you and I, things you can see and things you cannot see. And to a large extent, these archives constitute and shape knowledge about the visible and invisible world, even including what you are going to call the non-world, together with forces that breathe and forces that don't breathe, secular ideas and non-secular ones, with destinies, ideas within cities, kingships, medicine, environment, sciences and technologies. Above all, they contain shelves on sacrifices and shrines, names, places, incantations, invocations, and the entire cosmos of all the deities and their living subjects among human and non-human species. Bear in mind, I've talked about non-world and world, non-humans and humans, because in ritual knowledge, they do not make that distinctions between non-human and humans. They combine them. And in some ways, what is underneath your feet, what is in the sky, things in the deep sea, they are all combined as part of a knowledge system. And I'm deploying the term archives in relation to rituals to challenge the conventions of Western archives, namely, what is deemed worthy of preservation and organization as data, whether or not it is interpreted at any given moment. And this intervention is not to restrict archives inside the location of the library or university or museum, because you can't just locate them that way, the way we traditionally think in terms of Western archives and library. And I'm also seeking to apply the techniques and resources of academic archives to rituals so that we can have greater valuation and greater preservation. And I had the metaphorical and mystical sense of archive as well, one that does not require residency in the academy. And I'm insisting that we must never lose sight of that dimension of archive that is never fully collected, but one that retains power and agency in invisible ways. The Library of Congress, you deal with the visible ways, but there are also archives that had invisible ways to them. And I provoke a category of archive itself with the revolutionary insistence on expanding our understanding of it through an elevation of the significance of ritual as a name for a large component of cultural meaning-making. How do we contend with the destruction of archive, various forms of violence? Can we clarify with certainty what we can reclaim? In varied ways, a countless number of sages, priests, devotees, and practitioners created oral and visual libraries which are linked to ritual complexes and secular palaces. Subsequently, cultural knowledge has extended from the deep past to our present day. It is through their knowledge that histories and traditions were constituted, while identities were formed, and philosophy as we know it emerged. Although learned people were part of the community, they were there as ordinary members, while others constituted the leadership. Today, without specific names, we label the originators of knowledge collectively as the past and as traditions, sometimes using traditions in a very misleading way. And there's a large body of what we call the traditions and ritual archives, which provide templates for the future. And the contents of these archives become philosophy, literature, and history. Their interpretations manifested in our present as part of our engagement with heritage and modernity. Just as in poems, ritual dances, sacred drums, ritual textiles Components of the archives can be isolated, but they can also be combined into a body of interlocking ideas and philosophy in the context of the broad terrain of what you can call ancestral knowledge. Whether you aggregate or disaggregate them, they encode memory and remembrance in various ways and forms. They store most of our indigenous production, memories, legacies, histories of our lives and ancestors, and they lead us to the reinvention of the cosmos that we inhabit, different from, but not useless, to what modern science does. While postulating there is a coloniality of archives, that is, archives resulting from the colonial encounter, built on the template of Western knowledge, we can deduce that it has served us well in some number of ways. However, it has not only proven to be severely limited, both in terms of intellectual possibilities as well as scope, but it's also an agency of control that frames our subjectivities and objectivities and how we can pursue them. The colonial archive has been imposed on us and given prominence over the ancestral ritual archive, leading to the erasure and degradation of indigenous perspectives, the endogenous. In fact, nothing reveals the shallowness of the colonial archive more than the very time frame its contents are able to cover. Be it in the national archives in Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, the restored records, if at all constituted as expected, speak to no more than 65 years. Any archive in Africa, they only cover 65 years. And we're talking of a century before Christ. Contributions in those colonial archives are crowded within the colonial time era, and after decolonization, many of them have been left to their own devices as post-colonial leaders struggle for some other things. And as to the time before, only the long 19th century has had a few interpreters. Regarding the post-colonial era, its archivable knowledge has basically been confined to the media because the archives stopped collecting materials from the 60s. While we struggle for sheer economic, political, and cultural survival, histories of centuries between the Stone Age and the 18th century have been either left to rot or are easily ignored and in the process lost for the most part. This loss is a function of lost archives, and sadly, the disregard for those archives that can still be reclaimed, as in the case of ritual archives. They're there, we just have to reclaim them. The contention that the past was not possible to recover is a mythical thought or assertion that many people have come to accept, simply because of how it was packaged by the coloniality of knowledge, which unfortunately incapacitated the possibility of the use and transformation of our collective memories. The very incapacitation of ritual archives is by itself an example of an epistemic violence. The foregoing two archives, competing but not necessarily complementary, have created a knowledge divide. The colonial one that is aligned to power, both external and internal, and the ritual that is aligned with marginality. As we pursue great works, ritual fits the colonial as raw materials, by and large, existing permanently in its shadows and dominance. Indeed, the archives of coloniality privilege methodologies that go a long way toward advancing the projects of external concepts and legacies, to say nothing of economic and political interest. Ritual archives, on the other hand, deal with ancestral legacies and indigenous concepts and epistemologies. History, as defined in the colonial archives, is different from Itan, to use a Yoruba example, as defined in the Yoruba ritual archives. They are not doing the same thing. While Itan, based on ritual archives, is assessed within the realm of folklore or mythologies in the academy, analysis of colonial archives are assessed in the categories of originality and validity in the same academy. In the Western conception of historical knowledge, Itan, just to stay with one example, lacks validity, while academic history is imbued with one. Itan is unreliable, but history is. Itan is not accessible and transparent, while history is. Yet Itan entails and binds both historical and geographic knowledge in ways that Western conception of knowledge can never do. As an assessment of Western education, a new elite successfully acquires new forms of knowledge for mobility, de-rationalizing the pre-Western, but grudgingly absorbing indigenous worldviews while distancing themselves from the previous keepers of established indigenous knowledge. A mytho-historical knowledge system has been ruptured, replaced by a former Western system invested with colonizing values of progress and modernity. How do we define and isolate the contents of these archives and their meanings? You can do it in multiple ways. You can invoke oral or written literature, ritual performances, whether physical representation of gods and goddesses. It's a fact that this enters the realm of routine expression of spirituality, proverbs, songs, poetry, all of which generate meanings of religious and secular significance. Second, we can utilize the opportunity to frame some dimensions of the epistemological and ideological significance of these archives, which is in fact a body of knowledge on a wide range of issues, including but not limited to cultural cognition, ideas and idea formation, semiotics, and education. And I'm going to suggest some transformational ways to keep these archives. I want to revalidate these archives, but in doing so, within Western derived academies, to involve indigenous practitioners in research and knowledge dissemination, and to formulate evaluation mechanisms to authenticate indigenous knowledge and those who communicate them using data-driven and emic standards. At all levels of the educational system, indigenous ways of knowing, along with the knowledge and researchers of those accumulated knowledges, must be fully blended with what we do in the academy. Ritual archives tell us that we must review and question our externally derived approaches and the limitations of the methodologies we deploy. Western-derived disciplines such as religious studies, history, philosophy as subjects of the humanities have carefully fragmented ritual archives. But it's time for all those disciplines to combine to provide an understanding of the centers of indigenous epistemologies, to unify their ontologies and convert them to theories that will be treated as universal. To take an example of how ritual archives can work, divination. To stay with Yoruba example, Ifa. We can call a discipline, and we could have done so many years ago, Ifalogy, and turn it into a department. It could have enabled hundreds of scholars to learn and work across disciplines, and they probably would have been able to decode this epistemology by now and use it to create other forms of knowledge. They will have uncovered hidden dimensions of the endogenous. As scholars dealing with Africa, questions must be posed as to how each of us understands and applies indigenous knowledge, which will border on values and cultures in our research and teaching. Should we always ground the analysis and understanding of our fields solely in Western-derived epistemologies? No, we should not be doing this. Indeed, while we study practitioners and others who create archives for us, others have not studied us. And sadly, we have not even studied ourselves. So we have to engage in various layers of conversation. Conversations with ourselves, conversation with ritual archives in order to highlight the voices that are delegitimated in academic spaces, pointing to the contents of these archives as sources of multiple epistemological as well as methodological, political, and cultural messaging. And we must interrogate broader academic concerns. What are these things? I will only use just one example, objects, so that I can bring home what I'm talking about. Just objects. Objects as tests. And if you look at me very closely, I'm a body of these objects, and it's deliberate. Because the body you are looking at is just part of the objects of what I mean by an archive, including what I'm holding, because it has meaning. If I do it this way, irrespective of where I turn it, is an object that is communicating messages. Gods and goddesses generate around them a wide range of paraphernalia of text and sounds. We have not studied sounds. Visible and invisible symbols, we've ignored symbols, objects and signs. Orality in itself is extensive, comprising parables, proverbs, tales, allegories, dilemma stories. Drums and musical compositions go with venerations, along with sacrifices, and practitioners and priests with insignias and dress. Rituals and ritual speech is very elaborate, connect with kingship and indigenous power systems, and it talks about practices, immunitics, and connections can be made with ideas of social control. Invocations have to be made. Invocations constitute an entire library. Offerings, comprising food, identify with specific deities, as in boiled yams and snails for Orishanla. A god and the definitive markers go with its divination and methods, dress, dances, literature, performance, drama. Take the god of iron, Ogun, which I'm using because of Soyinka, who has popularized it. And without Ogun, Soyinka would not have won the Nobel Prize. That's the basis of his Nobel, the god of iron. That's where he draws his ideas from. Take Ogun, for instance, and the god leads you to chants, elaborate Ijala chants that you hear from Ewe to the borders of Benin. Irimonjede rise to dancing, to folklore, to literature, to paintings, to decorations. Oshun and Yemoja combine land with water, humans with fish and crocodiles. Crocodiles are our neighbors. Fish, they're part of our neighbors in the way these archives are constituted. You are not supposed to be using their skin for decoration. It's like killing your neighbors. But these are ideas that we've changed their meanings because of the way we change the epistemologies. Fertility with productivity, adding to the storehouse of knowledge on women and gender. We can demonstrate this richness in so many ways, making use of gods and goddesses. As we rework the complexities around the deities to modern disciplines, which we have to do, we disaggregate the ritual archives into many component units as literature, music, drama, psychology, anthropology, and many more. And you and I work around each component so that a scholar can study Ifa in various departments: philosophy, music, drama, literature, linguistics. In each of these disciplines, Ifa becomes disconnected from the multi-layered and intricately connected indigenous epistemology that produces it in favor of the concerns of the disciplines framed from other epistemologies external to the indigenous. Because what we are doing is actually faulty to start with. In this regard, Ifa has been disembodied and fragmented. The questions posed can become external to his own organic makeup. For example, why do you pose a question, whether Ifa is a philosophy or religion? It's you who is posing the question. Are incantations magical texts or creative literary texts? If Ifa verses are originally recited orally, what happens when they become printed texts? You can translate many of them. Do the printed texts, when read, do they become as effective as divination? If I can give you an example of an incantation, but once I translate it, it loses its power. It's gone. Text, as in the case of chants, taken out of the Odu, are entry points to the understanding of history, to epistemologies of cosmology and mythology. But the cosmology and mythology cannot operate without forms of rationality, as they need to explain other issues such as medicine, politics, and critical appreciation. I'll be skipping many pages. If you're interested in the paper, it's already fully written. It's 54 pages, and I'll be willing to send it to you. Space will not permit me to elaborate on the breadth of these archives or the density of each of them, with its own hydra-headed fragments and hundreds of individual constructions and presentation. Instead, I would like to take some organic matters and objects, some of which I brought with me to illustrate what I'm talking about. And some of them may look so ordinary to you. Let me start with what, if you've been to Brazil or Bahia or Cuba, it is one of the most common objects you are going to find. His English word, which is mistranslated, is called bitter leaves. It's called a wuro. You find it wherever you find the African diaspora of the Atlantic world. That plant alone, if you go to, you can't go to Candomblé, Santeria, and all of them without confronting it. It looks to you like a small plant, or take kola nuts, or take cowries, photographs, textiles, paintings, and sculptures, all items of religious significance. But they are texts that you can accumulate into rich archives, and they speak to a wide variety of issues. And these texts are so many. And for those of you who do literature, you may have come across them. In this interest of time, I'm passing a number of these things around. They look ordinary to you, but they open up enormous amount of libraries, enormous. If you have read things fall apart, you'll have come across kola nuts, and what that means in terms of its significance. These objects that I'm sharing with you, they reach Cuba, Brazil, United States, and other areas to form part of the ritual archives in the Afro-Atlantic religions. On the African side, spirituality and materiality are united, as in the use of sculpture to represent the deities. So, for instance, this is not an object of embroidery. This is connected to the complexity of divination, in which the diviner, the Babalawo, holds it, and he uses it to communicate so many things. And for those of you who have also gone to Brazil, Yanifa, you will see them holding it. And they've done it in so many ways, and carved it in so many ways. And during question and answer time, I can talk about this, and you will see how this in itself is like saying you want to write a book, although I'm just holding it as an object. These divinities were represented by statues, statuettes, lithographs, as worshippers dance before altars, bow and arrows symbolizing various forms of orisha. Objects speak and they communicate without words. We have people who do semiotics, who do silences, because they're talking. They're using a different language. They're speaking to you. And they supply narratives. They encourage the creativity of storytelling, and they facilitate performance. Indeed, the use of such objects as costumes, ritual trees, wood carvings, metal sculpture, cowries, kola nuts, ritual specialists become ritual performers. And they not only become librarians, they also are narrators. They manipulate objects. Song and stories will follow, and they present ritual performances before an audience to participate. Objects encode the characters of the being they represent, even telling us their characters, their manners, whether they are hot-tempered, cool, and calm, volatile. Colors are very significant. And when next you see African art, pay attention to color, because they're talking to you. They are denotative, as in red for being aggressive, quick-tempered, white for what it means. And these colors have regional variations, as in blue among the Yoruba. In the contrast is a binary epistemology that leads to a series of long conversations on human behavior and interpersonal relationships in society. The extensive poetry does work with words in relation to objects, yielding methodologies and epistemologies in the realm of the mytho-historical and institutions that lead us to modes of knowing and forms of knowledge. The mistake we've made, and why Africans made this mistake, is to accept the notion of the museum. That is a big mistake. Because when you treat them as museum pieces, with short descriptions to describe them, we've undermined them in many ways. But if we have treated them as archival items, we will have acquired a different form of result. Here, these objects actually fit into the description of an archive as a place to keep historical records, although the collection of such objects may defy categorization, because it means we have to work out alternative sets of categorization. The bitter nut that I'm spreading around are historical records. The location of an archive may be characterized as an archive in itself, as in the grove of a ritual tree that are so many, where the tree and its location constitute a library. Documents in an archive are treated as primary sources, so also should many ritual objects be treated as such, as they communicate messages that can be used to reconstruct the past and understand ideas about the world. Objects open a wide door to a large body of mythologies, stories, legends, sayings, short and long. And these categories are many, some, like written records, created for specific meaning that we communicate from one person to another. Some are signs, as in Aroko among the Yoruba, in which the combination of cowries in relation to words and other objects formulate extensive codes, and you need specialists to decode them and to create text and interpretations. Ritual communications were elaborate from Osain, say among the Yoruba, to the interpretation of dreams and many more. Objects represent permanent archives, like cemeteries, a ground of memory, sacred groves, and so many examples that we have been able to ignore. And in those examples, you see how we walk into us, spirits. Humans and fairies are united in ways of knowing that need their secularization in academic programs, as some students engage with the belief that witches are with them in their classrooms, thus leading them to the generation of non-Western ideas. They supply tests on the environment and open us to multiple worlds of charms, magic, and medicine. Songs are constructed, derived from them, based on sound observation of various uses for curing diseases. The bitter leaf that I've just spread around is part of the species that is common, useful for food, but also for its medicinal properties, from its connections with diabetes to the reduction of headaches and fever associated with AIDS as well. The Brazilian species has multiple uses as anti-inflammatory and antibacterial. Plants are part of our knowledge system. Such plants entangle our world with those of non-humans. In this entanglement, facts and fiction become merged into both complex and simple ideas, and we try to unite them in various ways. They supply ideas on prayers, on philosophy, as in the case of Kola Nut, and images in sculpture and paintings are abundant, but their connections with historical writings and with what we characterize in various departments, we need to rethink them and strengthen them. We tend to use more as book covers these sculpture and paintings, than as elaborate texts within the books. Yet images are philosophical expressions connected with thought and life. Located in museums, we tend to see and appreciate them, not necessarily engage in dialogue with them. However, images represent mentalities, power, and strength. They can be used to generate image theories and create extensive narratives on cultures, transcultures, and intercultures. They supply critical issues on hybridity. To carve an object is about the representation of self, history, identity. One image of Eshu happens to be one of my favorite gods, tell us about social and cultural issues, portrayal of multiple and ambivalent ideas, representations of hybridity, discourse on difference, perception, semiotics, religion. Multiple specializations can emerge around image theory, image critical methodologies, image anthropology, image and culture, image philosophy, perception and seeing, listening, silences, image styling. An image moves you towards the spiritual and religious. But there's an aesthetic idea living within that image, allowing for taste on cultures, forms, and styles. Why gazing without talking? You create the text on your own, saying something, creating what Nishi calls an army of metaphors. It generates a wide range of imaginations and thought systems. To take an Eshu image, like the ambiguity of Eshu itself, it cannot be read in an interpretive singularity. The image has ideas within itself and ideas outside of itself. Seeing the image is to see force and strength, power, epistemic responses that connect back to language and metaphysical perceptions. The image is about the body, in its physical and non-physical realms. An element in the body gestures to sexuality, and yet another to the sanctions of transgressions. The politics of images lead us to the pregnancy of culture, ready to give birth to social issues. In its external outward look, you move to the realm of beauty, visual effects, conversation on everyday practices, languages, word creation, forceful inscription of perception, and experience onto our consciousness. Look further, and in the Eshu image unfolds more dimensions around performance, and other bodies of knowledge open up, kinesthetic and other ideas. The thought that you express to yourself and to others will move you back to the Eshu image. Its force becomes a part of you. Whether you hate or like Eshu, the image becomes activated. In the process, you must generate text around the image, expressing your religiosity, philosophy, and opinions. Eshu has entered your mental system, active in your conversation with yourself and others. Your thought is a test on the physical world, on the afterlife, on mythologies, on religion, and more. And your test is going to be different from my own test. An artistic production becomes a body of knowledge at various levels, political, cultural, social. The Eshu image transfers you to the understanding of culture and society, what is left of the past, and how the past is reformed, deformed, transmogrified, ordered, and reordered. The past may even be disappearing, and that image affirms it. What then originally appears like a small wooden object opens a vastness of knowledge. Its edges become borderless. Its existence acquires a force. We are no longer dealing with the aesthetic of difference, as in looking at objects in the British Museum in London and looking at Eshu in the Republic of Benin. We are forced to move into the orbits of knowledge in which all component parts of the body become signifiers of Oju Eshu, becomes different. Oju means face, Eti Eshu, the hair, Oku Eshu, Ogo Eshu, Inu Eshu, all the components, we are breaking them down. And each unit is semi-autonomous, but aggregated to Gbogbo Ara Eshu in another layer of meaning. Had the issue recitation. You create another layer. Like your own head, Ori, that of issue is also the zone of intelligence and emotions. All his calculations and miscalculations reside here. You can see his head, you can see his body, his fronts, attributes, then derived from various parts of its components of the body, all concerned with foibles and destiny. You have to trigger your own wisdom and strength to deal with Ori issue. And as you do so, your own thinking process will begin to break down into a series of components as that of your own wisdom or your own stupidity. You draw in your own bowel, knowledge from your stomach, because in some cultures you put knowledge in your stomach, not just food. To rely on your inner senses, your eyes must work well to recall your inner essence and your perception. Should you become confused, you have to seek wisdom. And following elaborate conversation and insight derived from your stomach, you become the point of validation and you can create new sets of knowledge. The issue image, coupled with all other objects as well as all texts and the entire ritual archives, lead us to the indigenous intellectuals and their epistemologies. Combined, they deal with the invisible realities of knowledge, as in witchcraft, but they complicate the visible ones, as in all forms of epistemologies. And I have a long section on epistemologies and how, if you are able to use these archives, we will no longer be talking about universalism, but about pluriversalism, in which separate epistemologies derived from distinct archives will lead us to fresh ideas. And this is going to be a bigger project in which we begin to understand indigenous knowledge systems, the insertion of the entire range of vernacular epistemologies into a formal education system. And we begin to teach a new generation of students a new body of ideas. The connection between global power and global knowledge is very clear-cut, and how global knowledge has been problematic in a continent like Africa. And part of the ways in which we can challenge this knowledge is to rethink not just the archives we use, but to search for the very centers of the epistemologies. And these epistemologies are many, and we have not started the work we need to do. Let me now go to the last part, which is how do we move these archives into the public spaces? Because we have to do them, we have to move them into public spaces. Whether as texts, objects, or symbols, ritual archives have faced serious dangers, ranging from extinction, ridicule, marginalization, and erasure. The first problem is that of intellectual inequality. All externally derived knowledge systems, Islamic and Western, are seen to be superior to them. The inability to create permanent written tests with specialists linked to formal system of knowledge, as in the case of Western-derived academies, create a drawback. The social context of knowledge production is crucial, and this is a second source of trouble. African scholars who produce knowledge for Africa seek globalized knowledge instead of fully embracing these ancestral epistemologies. What should we do? I want to make 5 recommendations. First, that we must modify the orientation of our research, and that university-based scholars as researchers and those outside of it should be integrated in a different manner. That the dichotomy that we have created is false, and we have to bring back indigenous ways of knowing into what we do. We have to rethink the outcome of our research. The assumption that the research generated within universities is the most important is very misleading. Indeed, indigenous researchers connect with their organic communities more directly, feeding the constitution of knowledge and ways of knowing. We have to assume that the power of social agency does not just lie in the academy, and we must give social agency to those who produce other forms of knowledge. We have to rethink how we produce knowledge, and we have to ask a question, who are we anyway? We write about the sociology of knowledge, not necessarily by building on indigenous inheritances, but by appropriating indigenous voices into a chaotic global discourse. We write about the sociology of social movements without joining the working class to protest injustice. We write about gods and goddesses while not joining their worship except as observers. We disconnect what we do from the public that we serve. We must begin to locate the communities, compile and update catalogs. Ritual archives already exist in private spaces with associations, organized priesthoods, and we have to connect more with them. We must begin to encourage autobiographies, autoethnographies, and religious ethnographies, and we must begin to keep them in ways that will be accessible to others. We have to begin the process of digitizing them, given the fact that this is not possible. I'm calling for the reconfiguration of the disciplines, saying that the colonial structure of the old and the very new universities has not been very hospitable for this form of archives. We must begin to allow PhD dissertation to be written with a new set of sources, and even to be written in indigenous African languages. And the academy has to accept the validity of the use of African languages, as well as the validity of many of these new and alternative sources. And by doing so, the theoretical implications will be many. I want to read my last paragraph, and I want to start with a proverb. A person who carries a basket of eggs on his head must walk with measured steps. In the final analysis, perhaps you and I, as practitioners operating in the Western academies, will become the traditional intellectuals whose power and legitimacy will be challenged and superseded by organic intellectuals connected with this organic data. And organic intellectuals whose legitimacy will be based on epistemologies derived from ritual archives, as well as intellectual rationality built around cultural legitimacy. They have to rethink what we have inherited, and in rethinking them, they may move us forward in new ways. We cannot continue to carry baskets of eggs on our heads and be walking in haste. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Falola. I think you've certainly given the African Studies field a challenge. But when we look at the African world, the importance of indigenous knowledge becomes very, very critical. At this point, we can open up for a very short Q&A. So if we have anyone who would like to pose a question.
To what extent do you think these ritual archive objects will be allowed to live around them diminish and subsequently the reverence?
Diminishment.
So to what extent do you think the ritual archives, the objects in the ritual archives, the myth around them will diminish and
Okay.
subsequently the reverence that will be?
Okay, I understand now. I can take many questions, so I can answer them.
Okay, we'll take all the questions and
Yeah.
then Dr. Falola will answer. Sybil, would you like to?
Dr. Falola, I'd like to thank you so much for your presentation. It brings back memories for me because I too am a graduate of the University of Ife. While I was there, I was mentored by Professor Akintola Akinbobo.
Of blessed memory.
You mentioned orality.
Yeah.
question here? Would you like to go in with your question?
Thank you for the lecture. What is the role of religion in this spiritual archive, particularly today? Pentecostal religion now. Are we not losing this spiritual thing? Or are we not going to lose it because the Pentecostal thing forbid all this spiritual thing? We don't allow people to practice it anymore. What is the role of your teaching on this?
Would you like
Yes,
to go
yes.
in?
Joanne, you have to ask me a question. I won't let you go. But there are two other people before you.
Thank you so much for your presentation.
Yeah.
Professor Chief Anthony Panola. My question is on the use of African languages for documenting research report, that is dissertation. My question is twofold. One question is, are you particular about African institutions or United States? That is one part of it, one question. Another question is, how easy will it be to use African languages to write reports in all disciplines, like medicine, sociology, considering the language that are used as lingua francas in Africa today?
Okay. And I want to answer all the questions.
Okay, let's take the two last questions, and then we'll let the professor answer or respond.
So wonderful to have the opportunity to be illuminated. Thank you. For those of us in the diaspora who are part of the descendant community, we come seeking knowledge that is our inheritance. Some of it we can get through books. We don't have access to the oral tradition in the same way. I once asked Dr. Akuwowo about the way we children in the diaspora understand things. And he told me that sometimes the ancestors come to the children in our dreams. And I'm wondering if you might comment on that.
Yes, ma'am.
The objects that you shared with us, can you just tell us the ritual importance of each one of them? Because that is important to me, ritual.
Well, I don't think you can have the time to do that. What I will do is I'll wait after the lecture and do some, because what I was trying to say is that they're very elaborate. They just don't mean one thing. And also bear in mind an objective operates in multiple ways in terms of combination. So this bead, I can turn them around and combine them differently. That's the way objects work. So they don't lend themselves to just a singularity of interpretations. So, and then when you, so when you take this one, for instance, it gets connected to rites of passage. And as we change the rites of passage, this one changes its meaning, and it opens up a greater amount of conversation. So if I do this, there's an interpretation. If I do this, there's an interpretation. If I break it, I'm saying something different. Then I begin to chew it. I'm changing its meaning. So the point I'm trying to make, and I try to use the issue as an example, is to say that, and you will see I try to use the analogies that people can relate to test, or library, because it's a knowledge system that begins to talk. I can use this to pray that God is going to give you long life. And if I had incantations, I change the meaning. It becomes something else. So I will talk more on one-on-one. The language questions has always come up forever. Forever, it will always come up. So, there are countries under 10 million. There are actually countries, 6 million people who use their language. Czech Republic, Sweden, the state of Israel. Hello, you asked me the question, are you there? They use their language. Take the Yoruba people, for instance, right? They are bigger than all these countries that I've just mentioned. And there's a dozen countries, there's just 10 million people who use their language. Or Bali, or the development of Hebrew language after the Second World War. But the best example, the Afrikaner in South Africa. They were so successful that I do not know how many of you have been to the University of Stellenbosch. That's Afrikaner they use until current challenges. They created this language in South Africa. They insisted on using it. Part of what led to the Soweto uprising, for those of you who are alive then, was because they wanted to impose Afrikaner on Soweto black people, and it led to a major crisis. So it's actually not true that you cannot take a language and turn it into an academic project or use it in school. One of the projects that was aborted was at Ife, where she mentioned, in which we actually started this, teaching, using Yoruba as a language of education from elementary school. We started it. And it worked. Unfortunately, today, you now have Africans who cannot speak African languages. Even you have Yoruba people in Lagos and Ibadan who cannot use the language. The tragedy is they are not good in English either. It's not as if they are good in Yoruba. And if you look at major writers like Achebe, well, it is the Grandian Igbo language that makes Achebe. If you take out the Igbo language from there, what are you going to have? So the tremendous advantages that are located in this language, right? We begin to lose them either. So I don't like to use myself as an example. When I wrote my memoir, 2 of them in print, I wrote it in what we call Yoruba English. They could not find a copy editor. It's not going to work. And the publisher said, and it became very successful. Now, okay. We will not damage your English. And each time people read the memoir, they ask me questions. There's a line I started by saying, a frog will not know that there are 2 worlds unless it jumps into hot water. A student comes to me and said, why will a frog jump into hot water? Is it stupid? But that's a language. Or if I say, what is after 6 is more than 7, nobody in England can say that, because it's not possible for him or for her to ever think that way. What is 6 after 7 is an organic way of talking that is connected to a specific location. And what is after 6, after 7, as small as it is a conversation that you and I can stay here till tomorrow to be discussing. You can actually, in African universities, write PhD thesis in Zulu and Yoruba. That is within your regulations to formulate. You don't need any external power to validate it. It wasn't like the time when I was doing GCA level that they had to take my scripts to University of London. That moment is gone. Because they can't be blaming things on other people. They can constitute an agency of themselves and say, we want you to write your PhD in Igbo at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. Nobody can stop them. They are the one validating that degree and making use of it within their national boundaries. And they'll be surprised that that person can work elsewhere. So I think we have been very careless in that regard. Generally, we have been very careless. And we have to rethink the very process. The very fact that you use your languages as they do in Germany or in France does not mean you don't access other languages. I'm actually much better in Yoruba than in English because that was my generation. That's how we went to school. And then at some point, my grandmother also forced me to learn Arabic. So this language issue is a project of state policy, and it's one we have to seriously think about. The first question, yes, can you begin to demystify this object over time? That's what modernity and Western science will move you towards. But bear in mind that those who plan education system for you and those who shape the knowledge system can also create agencies in the other direction. You know they can do that. In which they say, when I was at the age of 10, I could read all the classics in Yoruba. Indeed, I wrote my first play at the age of 12. Why? Because they set up this elaborate drama competition, poetry competition across a big region. And they were asking us to compete. And we were competing. That's how my interest in language and performances developed. Years later, when I wrote a play and I was looking for people to act it, I was shocked that getting people to act was very difficult. You know why? Because they are no longer organically connected to acting as a day-to-day practice, as I was as a child, in which that play that we were doing was what we later learned in the university to be performance. I come from Ibadan, and if you've been to Ife, you will know Ibadan. You cannot live in my city without an extensive infrastructure of language. And we pride ourselves in the ability to create instant poems to abuse people. You just have to master it. You just have to master it. And it's very intricate. And as you begin to do that, by the time anybody sets up a theater, you already have people that are already so brilliant and so good in acting that you don't have to be spending so much time training them. And you see how Nollywood, which is the third largest movie industry in the world, is bringing back some of these things. I think it's tragic to lose them. It's very tragic. History. History in the Western Academy follows a format of definition, so in which we give you a degree. And that formal definition it will say that the definition of ITA. First of all, any project of translation is very risky. If I say Owe and you call it proverb, you are making a big mistake. It doesn't work like that. If I say character, you say Iwa. If I say head, Ori. So projects of translations are very problematic because the component of what Yoruba we call Ita is much broader than what we call history to have a university degree. Because when you break it down, it contains metaphysical world, the environment, they don't separate them. Trees and human beings can be living together. The stories of the elephants and human beings can be combined, and they combine it with issues of memory and issues of hagiography. So the way they define it, you have to fracture it into various disciplines because it's not just history. It will include other things that we now study. And finally, your dreams and what Akiwawa told you, well, we have to keep dreaming. She's been asking me to stop, and I will wait behind and take more questions.
I'm sorry that we have to end our program at this point, but again, please join me in thanking Dr. Falola for his presentation. I'd also like to invite you in our conference room. We have a small display of some of the works of Dr. Falola, so please join us in the conference room and perhaps we can continue conversations there. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.